Thank you for joining us at the Evolution of Medicine Summit. A warm welcome. We wanted to make a specific thank you to our sponsors that have made this event possible. Energetics, an innovative natural remedy and supplement company, is committed to revitalizing medicine, and Cyrex Labs, a clinical immunology laboratory specializing in functional immunology and autoimmunity. Most of all, thank you for listening. If you'd like to share this with your colleagues and friends on Facebook if you enjoy the content, and if you have questions, you can ask us on Twitter with the hashtag EvoMed. Finally, if you really want to play your part in accelerating the evolution of medicine, ask your doctor if the Evolution of Medicine Summit might be right for them. Thank you and enjoy. Hello and welcome back to the Evolution of Medicine Summit. This is James Maskell and we are here at a very special moment for the summit. Today we're going to be talking about women's health and we're going to be talking about the evolution of women's health. And so when I was looking around to see who would be the best person to bring, a really good understanding of the evolution of women's medicine and what it's going to take, I had to have Dr. Aviva Romm. And Dr. Romm, thanks so much for being here today.
My pleasure, James.
So just a bit of a background if you haven't heard of Dr. Romm's work, but Dr. Romm is a mother of 4 grown children. She is a Yale-trained physician specializing in integrative medicine for women and children. She also started as a midwife, as an herbalist, works with Dr. Mark Hyman in his center in Lenox, Massachusetts. And Aviva is on fire about creating a better world for all of us. And she does this as a physician and as a writer and as a communicator with a big social and environmental conscience. And I've just been really impressed with everything that I've seen and read, and I'm so glad to have you here today. So Aviva, for those people who are listening in today, what is it that really gets you on fire and makes you so passionate about this evolution of women's medicine and women's health?
James, it has a lot to do with satisfaction and fulfillment. Women feeling satisfied, having their life needs met, and having somebody that they can trust to help them with that guidance. And historically, there was always someone in the community midwife or healer, that women could go to talk about their problems, their concerns, their gynecologic issues, their pregnancies, their births. But so many women now, when they go to the doctor, they don't have that person. Women are rushed through a 7 or 10-minute appointment and often feel like their presence is sort of secondary to getting the paperwork done or filling out a bunch of check boxes. So for me, it's about creating connection for women in their bodies, for women in their health, for women and nature. So I'm a midwife and a physician and an herbalist, and of course, a woman and a mom. So for me, I'm passionate about helping other women to find what I know is possible and what I've been able to create for my own self as health in my own life. So I've spent like 30 years supporting women in achieving health by listening to their stories, helping them to connect to nature, and advocating for them. And when I see that connection happen for the woman, the spark, the light go on, the health problems get better, it just kind of fuels that fire I have to keep going forward to help more and more women realize that they can thrive. And that's a great feeling. So maybe it's a little selfish. I like the great feeling.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it certainly drives us on to great things. We've had some great speakers and we will have even more great speakers through the summit speaking about pediatrics and so forth. It seems like, even though I hate to say it, the women's role in the evolution of our health as a society is maybe more important than men's just because of that reproductive capability. And we're seeing, now studies talking about toxicity and stress and these things passing through the generations. So it seems to me that the women's health is a leverage point for the future of health in this country and in the world. So it seems like it couldn't be more important.
Absolutely. I mean, at some point, I realized that women were paying the price for the problems associated with medicine. And as a midwife, I really saw it. I had so much firsthand experience in what women were finding that they were missing out on. And, Just recently, someone wrote to me on Facebook. She shared a story of a relative who had gone to the doctor's office for some abdominal discomfort. The relative had an ultrasound that showed a cyst on her ovaries. The woman went and had it removed, and while she was on the table, the surgeons took out her uterus, her ovaries, and the cyst turned out to be benign. And they hadn't even waited for the pathology report to return. And I hear and witness these kind of stories all the time. And women are so hungry for something different. And it's not just about how women's bodies are treated, but it's really interesting in the actual historical evolution of medicine. So from the time of Bacon and Descartes, the evolution of medicine was actually built on these concepts that nature and women who were associated with nature could and should be dominated. So there's actually a lot of connection, and we see this written up a lot in the field of what's called ecofeminism, that what's happening to women's bodies and what's happening to nature are actually not inseparable. They're connected, and that has historical roots in the practice of medicine.
That is so interesting. I didn't know that. So I can certainly see that, the connection with Mother and Mother Nature, and see that. So if we look at that time period now, so from then until now, what has been the shift as far as the kinds of issues that women have been dealing with, as far as, acute diseases, childhood, and now towards, the different types of diseases that women face now?
Sure, great question. So likely women face many of the same kind of gynecologic conditions that women face today, things like irregular periods and challenging pregnancies, vaginal bleeding, fibroids. They were called different things back then, of course. They were referred to as disruption in the humors, for example. And interestingly, a lot of women's conditions were described as something called hysteria. And hysteria comes from the word hysterikos, which is the Greek word for uterus. So a lot of women's conditions were believed to have been a result of the uterus moving around inappropriately in the body. And then as that concept evolved, emotional hysteria later on got associated with being a woman. And basically, because we're women, we have these hysterical emotional problems. It's kind of interesting. Today, again, women face a lot of the same gynecologic conditions and a lot more chronic diseases than ever in history. So I would say that's really the big shift, is that we're seeing a lot more chronic problems, particularly inflammatory problems and autoimmune conditions that really were not, when you look back in the old medical literature, prominent. Depression and anxiety are much more rampant. Sleep problems are everywhere. So many women tell me they just have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, and they wake up tired in the morning even when they've had sleep. And a lot of women are struggling with disordered eating. And I don't just mean eating disorders, but there's so much influence of media and what our body image is supposed to be, that women are just struggling with what to eat and how much to eat, and skipping meals and eating foods in relationship to being a certain body size or weight. That's not realistic for most women. Fatigue is a huge problem for women. And so many women just tell me they just want their energy back so they can feel like they're themselves again. In addition, we have more fertility problems than ever. About 1 in 6 women in the United States will seek a fertility consult or some kind of fertility treatment. And then, of course, heart disease, osteoporosis, and cancers are now major contributors to illness and death for women, much more so than ever in the past. And then one more thing, when we think about young girls or adolescent girls as sort of pre-women, there's this enormous shift in when girls are starting to menstruate. And we're seeing, rather than, 12 or 14 or 16 as normal starting ages, we're now seeing girls menstruating at even 7 and 8 years old, becoming such a phenomenon that some endocrinologists have said, oh, well, maybe we should shift what's normal down to 8 years old, rather than saying, Houston, we've got a problem here. Maybe there's an environmental thing happening. And we know that a lot of the problems that women are facing are actually due to environmental problems.
Yeah. Well, nothing is scarier than a new normal. I think that's really
I
scary.
know,
Whether it be pediatrics or women's medicine, when there's a new normal, you have to wonder what's going on. So I'm glad we have a chance to speak about that. So environmental, obviously, we're talking about many different things. Could you just sort of break down what you feel or what the science is showing is driving these, these environmental illnesses and this chronic disease?
Sure. So environmental issues definitely play a major role, especially chemicals that mimic our own natural estrogen. So things that come from plastics, like a lot of people have heard of BPA. This is one example, but many others exist in our environment. In fact, hundreds of them do, maybe even thousands. For example, pesticide residues. There are many chemicals that match the molecule or the different molecules of estrogen in our body. And so they can bind with these things called receptors that turn on the actions that estrogen have. And that can cause many problems. For example, a lot of gynecologic, so breast and uterine cancers, for example, are due to excess estrogen. But excess estrogen can also drive other problems, maybe that are less serious, but still can cause a lot of discomfort and affect women's quality of life. For example, cyclic breast cysts, which cause a lot of pain for a lot of women, heavy periods, uterine fibroids, endometriosis, PMS, fertility problems, this problem of early menstruation that I mentioned for young women. And that's just really one of the problems we face. I'd say probably stress is the most significant underlying cause of so many of the chronic conditions women face. Diet and nutrition come in second, but it's important to remember that not only do most of us not grow up knowing what's healthy to eat, but we have to remember that our food choices and our relationship to food are tremendously influenced by stress. So for women, many of us choose to either eat out of stress, so we're eating more than we need to, or we're eating the wrong foods out of stress because stress makes us want to eat more sugar and more fat and more salt to keep up with the hormones and the chemicals that our adrenal glands pump out to help us cope with that stress. So we naturally reach for those carb and sugar kind of treats. Some women, on the flip side, actually end up skipping meals, either because they're stressed and that reduces their appetite, or because they're in such a hurry, for example, to get the kids to school in the morning and then get to work and then at work. So a lot of women are living on a cup or two of coffee for breakfast, for example. So that's a huge contributing factor. And there have been estimates in the medical literature that as many as 60% of all chronic diseases are actually caused by stress. There's another factor aside from stress, diet, and environment that I'd like to mention, and some people call it soul loss. I like to talk about it as a disconnection that women experience from their passion or their life purpose. So many women, most of us grow up taught to be nice and to follow the rules and to be good girls and to put everybody else first. And naturally, as caring moms, we're especially inclined to do that. And a lot of women, in putting themselves second, end up kind of tucking away their passions and their hopes and their interests, and sometimes even their economic autonomy. And yet, we know from many, many research studies that happiness and autonomy, and by that I mean a certain amount of control over our daily lives and our personal satisfaction, actually is critically important to being well, to our well-being. So that's something I really encourage people to take a look at.
do you think that's an evolution that's sort of swinging back the other way? Because obviously we've seen the women's role in society shift a significant amount in the 20th century. And I have a wife with a baby. And, you know, it certainly put all of those kind of conversations into perspective when we had the baby. What do you feel is sort of like driving it? And do you feel like we're moving towards a more sustainable paradigm on that cause?
Great question. I think that women now, more than ever, have the potential to really bust out of limiting roles and to experience a certain amount of deeper personal fulfillment for those women who need to find that outside of certain roles. I mean, some women actually feel perfectly happy and delighted to be putting themselves second, or find that deeper spiritual satisfaction in putting their children or their partner first. So it's not a crisis for all women, but it is for many women. And now with this shift of more empowerment for women, I think for a lot of us, we find ourselves even more pinched for time and even more stressed because we feel like we have to do it all. And in fact, a lot of us do. You have to show up 100% for work, and you have to show up 100% for your family. And we don't always have 200% to show up with. So for a lot of women, it kind of adds to the pressure. And also with some of the new roles that women have in being, significantly successful professional women, and expectations that women not just be, or quote unquote, just be stay-at-home moms. Women who choose to be stay-at-home moms sometimes feel like they're being judged by professional moms. So it creates a lot of complexity for women to sort of still navigate these new roles. And then adding to that complexity, James, and I don't know if you and your wife, have struggled with this at all, but for a lot of women who now their partner, especially if their partner is a man who is taking the stay-at-home role, that creates a lot of tension for men in many families where they're facing going against social expectations, right? So inside themselves, maybe they're thinking, well, I should be the breadwinner, or I should be making more money than my partner, because that's what men have been ingrained to believe for decades now. So that can create tension for women who are out in the work world and making more. So it's very complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the soul, you mentioned the diet part of things, the stress is the major component. You started off talking a little bit about toxicity. Are there any other sort of major causes you think that are driving this this sort of chronic disease epidemic in women that are worthy of attention?
I think those are the big ones. I mean, things like lack of adequate sleep can certainly add to the problem, but that kind of falls under stress.
Okay.
And then I'd say disconnection to natural rhythms can definitely contribute to problems for women. So biologically, the way our hormones work, they are in harmony or respond to, for example, the cycles of the moon, or even diurnal cycles, which means cycles that happen throughout the day. So when you think about something like melatonin, which most people have heard of as a supplement they can take for sleep, melatonin is actually a hormone that's produced in our bodies, in our brains, by the pineal gland, and it increases as the daylight decreases. So throughout the day, our melatonin levels are pretty low. And then as night falls, our melatonin levels are supposed to go up. And that natural shift helps prepare our body to be more tired and settle into sleep. It's interesting because melatonin also helps with other processes, for example, detoxification of estrogen and environmental chemicals. So there may be some relationship between inadequate levels of melatonin and even the development of breast cancer. But what happens now is so many of us, men too, this isn't just a problem women face, the workday never ends, right? We're checking our email until right before we go to bed. We've got the computer blue light in our eyes. We know from research that light well into the night, even after it's supposed to have been dark, lowers that melatonin. So just that simple disconnection, as one example, from natural rhythms
Yeah.
may contribute to sleep problems. And we know that sleep problems, so when we're not getting enough sleep or good quality sleep, it increases our risk of diabetes, of heart disease, of having accidents. So it's pretty significant. So
Yeah.
I really do try to encourage women wherever they live to follow good habits of shutting the computer down at least an hour before sleep, getting off the cell phone, and kind of getting into that natural rhythm. And anytime people can even take a walk outside, I think it helps to recalibrate our bodies. It's good for our spirit, quiets the mind. So that connection to nature to me is an important piece.
Yeah, that's a huge piece with the nature, and I think one of the things that I know you care about as well, which is tied into this whole nature piece, is the whole microbes piece. Because when you're in nature, you're getting all of that connection, but the extra value is there that you're in a very microbially rich environment, and I think that you can certainly see how microbiome issues have driven some of this disease problem as well, right?
Absolutely. It really starts with the foods that we eat. For example, if we're eating organic, or at least we're eating foods that come from the soil and haven't been exposed to what I call hysterical hygiene. You're getting a little dirt on your hands when you're preparing your food. Something gets near your mouth. You put something in your mouth while you're cooking. We start to inoculate ourselves with these really important microbial and agents that come from the soil. And then when we're eating whole foods, we're eating a little bit of fermented foods, we are connecting ourselves to that microbiome. And a lot of what is happening with modern agriculture, where we're just kind of destroying the soil with chemicals and destroying the quality of our food, again, we find a parallel between what's happening to nature and what's happening with all of our bodies, but especially women's bodies, because of gynecological infections and other reasons. We're highly likely to get exposed to antibiotics through the course of our lives. Women are more predisposed to vaginal infections, urinary tract infections, infections during birth that were treated with antibiotics. And so all of that, kind of like the chemicals we're putting in the soil, we're putting into our bodies. And it's interesting because for women, gut flora plays a really important major role in breaking down some of that extra estrogen that I talked about earlier. So good microbiome, so our good gut flora, is actually important to having regular menstrual cycles, to preventing cancer. And check this out, the type of microorganisms you have in your gut can determine whether you actually gain more weight from eating the same foods and getting the same amount of exercise as the next woman who actually has a healthier microflora, because some organisms actually extract more calories from the food. And then more weight gain also means more risk of diabetes, more risk of hormone problems, more problems with fertility, hair loss. So it kind of goes round and round and round between us and the environment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's amazing, and I appreciate you sharing those out, because obviously I feel exactly the same way about those causes. And it seems like part of this evolution of medicine is that the medicine can't just the evolution of medicine can't be a situation where you're relying on your doctor to work out all of those causes, because those causes that you mentioned are really things that you need to be doing in the 167 hours a week that you're not in the doctor's office. Avoiding, eating well, trying to reduce stress, trying to reduce your exposure to toxins, improving the microbiome. So it seems as though the evolution of medicine and this evolution of women's medicine is really about the patients taking responsibility for those sort of factors, and then sort of seeking the guidance of yourself or someone like yourself who can help them with the things that only doctors can provide, providing that individualized attention. Because if we're relying on doctors to try and avoid all of these causes of chronic disease, there's not enough time in the day, and there's certainly not enough time in the doctor's day, right?
Exactly. And the sad fact is, James, that doctors are not taught any of this information. I mean, I went to one of the top medical schools and residencies in the country, maybe in the world. And I had all of 110 minutes of nutrition scheduled in 7 years of medical education. And in fact, the person who was teaching the 110 minutes, it was in 2 separate 50-minute sessions, couldn't make it to one of the sessions. So while I had decades of eating well and nutritional information and nutritional science in my back pocket from my own prior training and prior experience, 99 of my classmates who were graduating with MD after the name had 50 minutes of nutrition. We had all of 0. I don't remember ever learning a single thing about the gut microflora. We had no discussion of environmental causes. We did not have classes on stress management. In fact, the only discussion about stress that we ever had in medical school or residency is just how stressed and miserable doctors are. So it's sad. And a lot of what is happening is that consumers, especially women, because the biggest users of alternative, if you will, or complementary medical therapies, or just health prevention and natural medicines, things from herbal medicines to supplements, yoga, mind-body practices, massage, all these types of things that are quote unquote alternative or CAM, are women. And women are spending millions and millions and millions of dollars, like I'm talking hundreds of millions of dollars out of pocket every year to see non-medical health professionals to get this information, and millions and millions and millions of dollars out of pocket on supplements and herbs because they can't get it from their doctors. And so now 2 things are happening. One is there are a lot of younger people going into medicine and younger people who are more aware that organic is not a strange word and who have heard of kale. And so those people are making a shift. Also, a lot of medical doctors just hate being doctors. There was a recent survey in a prominent medical database that said that 90% of primary care doctors would tell their children not to become doctors. So doctors are also getting really unhappy with the way things are going. And at the same time, there's this enormous consumer-driven financial incentive to understand alternative therapies, to keep those people who might go elsewhere keeping the money in the medical community, right? Coming in as patients and getting this information. So I think we're going to see a major shift. I mean, I'm already seeing it. Some of the things that I do as a doctor or was able to talk about and implement in medical school just because of my background would have been impossible 15 years ago. I would have been looked at as crazy or laughed out. And instead, people were asking me to create curriculum and be on boards of things in the medical community. So there's definitely a major shift happening.
Yeah, that's exciting. You know, most of the doctors that I've met over the last 10 years who have done integrative medicine, you know, their story is fairly similar, is that they went through, they became a doctor, there were people that they couldn't help, either it could be them or their child or their, you know, family members, and so they started to look into these other modalities, they started to see the science coming out, they started to go some other training, whereas you were sort of the opposite in that you started with being a midwife and an herbalist and then went to Yale after that training. When you speak to other physicians and when you speak to patients, is there any sort of benefit that you feel that you got from going in that opposite direction and sort of coming into medical school with the lights turned on rather than the other way around?
Well, that's a great question. So many of my colleagues who are also my dear friends have had such severe health problems as a result of their medical training. So my friend and colleague, Dr. Mark Hyman, who I work with at the Ultra Wellness Center, or my friend Lissa Rankin, who wrote a great book, Mind Over Medicine, they were just physically, emotionally, and spiritually traumatized by their medical training, which makes us stop listening to our bodies because we push past when we're tired, we push past when we're hungry. We're literally forced to work even when we're sick. I've heard doctors tell stories of having to go get doctors in medical training go get an IV so that they could go and show up at rounds because they were expected to be there, and I'm going home sick is not an answer. So many doctors become disconnected from their bodies, and then they get really sick. And then they realize that medicine, in a way, like the medical system, made them become sick. And that creates a massive epiphany for them. And then they become amazing integrative doctors who learn this stuff in a hurry, often to get themselves well, and then they see how well it works, and then they share that with other people. For me, I was incredibly fortunate in that I did not have to get sick to sort of have a story. My story was I grew up actually in a housing project in New York City. Kind of grew up on TV dinners and had a single mom and went to college really young. And I got exposed to what didn't even have a name back then. This was in the very early, it was in 1980, 1981. So there wasn't even a term alternative medicine. And at that time, there were a lot of political reasons or idealistic reasons that I changed my lifestyle and my diet. So, for example, I learned about factory farming, and I didn't want to participate in that. So I became a vegetarian. And although I'm not a vegetarian anymore, I call myself a flexitarian. I just try to eat well and eat healthy.
Yep.
I still make choices about my food that are environmentally and politically harmonious with my beliefs about a better planet and a better environment. Similarly, I shifted to relying on lifestyle and food to keep me healthy, and then herbal medicines or simple supplements when I needed to prevent an illness or treat an illness. And so for me, no pun intended, but my lifestyle and my evolution in becoming a physician was very organic. It happened very naturally over 30 years. So by the time I went to medical school, medicine had started to shift so much that I got into a lot of medical schools because the medical schools were so eager to have me and to have somebody who brought in this sort of organic and natural medicine mindset so that I could share it.
Yeah.
So when I ended up going to medical school, not only was I a student, but when I was at Yale, I ended up creating the integrative medicine curriculum for the medical school and sitting on a major medical curriculum board and being on the board of Yale's integrative medicine program still. And even to this day, years later, every year they ask me to rewrite the integrative medicine curriculum for the pediatric residency and the medical residency. So for me, I was able to go in as a guest in the medical model and learn the best of what I could learn in terms of skills that I could share with my patients. And it was brilliant because, as a physician, I spend as much time helping my patients, and I treat women and children primarily, although I have men in my practice as well. But I have the knowledge and the skill and the authority to help people get off of medications, to avoid unnecessary surgeries, and to feel they have someone they can trust in that guidance. And also when I suggest to a patient or we come to a meeting of the minds that, hey, that medical treatment probably really is necessary, people feel relieved that they're not getting something unnecessary. So for me, it's been just kind of an amazing, brilliant kind of coalescing of this whole gestalt of things I can share. Yeah.
That's great. So with all of that you've brought together, the years of herbology and midwifery and now being a doctor, if you're speaking to the, women who are listening to this, who are just looking to make the best decisions for themselves and for their families, obviously we want to try and avoid those causes of chronic disease, but there are probably other things that we can be doing. What are sort of like your big things that you recommend for every woman to be doing to live long and be healthy and avoid these these major causes of chronic disease, because I still see, amazing examples of people who are healthy and are vibrant, are living. I was just actually at an event in California, and I met a friend of mine's grandmother who was 94. She still plays golf. She's very active, and I was like, man, there's a secret. Everyone needs to be knowing these kind of things. So, from your experience, what are sort of like the percentage moves for women to be able to, to stay healthy in the long term and sort of avoid these causes, these chronic diseases?
I love that question. So, the most important thing I would say is to get educated about good food, safe choices for cosmetics, anything that you're going to put into and on your body can have such a profound impact on so many things, on your mood and mental health, on your physical health, on disease prevention, keeping your energy high, helping you sleep well. So getting educated about good food is number one for me. And one doesn't have to eat all organic. It doesn't have to be expensive. But one of the best things one of my patients said to me recently is, Dr. Aviva, I don't even have to read labels anymore because I'm buying food that hardly ever comes in packages. And I loved that, connecting with real whole food, powerful. So I really truly believe that food is our most important prevention and our best medicine.
Absolutely.
Yes. And then secondly, I would say finding ways to live mindfully and cultivate inner peace. It's sort of like don't sweat the small stuff in a way, but don't sweat the big stuff either. I'm almost 50, and there's a lot of things that I look back on my life and think, wow, I worried about that, and I didn't really need to be worrying about that. And worry and stress never really helps anything get better. I mean, a small amount of stress can make us inspired or make us work harder, but most of us are operating with much more than a small amount of stress. Yep. We're operating with a lot of stress in our lives. And that stress can set off our hormones, it sets off our sleep, it sets off what we eat, it makes us gain more weight, it disrupts our blood flow to our gut, it messes up our gut flora. But it also just makes us unhappy and it makes us not live well. So mindfulness is not hard to cultivate. And what I mean by mindfulness is learning to become aware of the thoughts that drive our actions that determine the end results. And so I talk to my patients about this idea of reverse engineering things. What's the result you want in your life? And if you want that result, what are the actions that you have to take? And what are the thoughts or the emotions that keep you from taking those actions? And so working on those thoughts and emotions that sabotage us is a powerful tool. There's so many wonderful self-help books out there, and finding a life coach can be a brilliant move. Somebody who can help you identify those inner obstacles that we all pick up along the way, or most of us pick up along the way, just from messages that we heard in our childhood, negative feedback that we got that inhibited us in some way, and just even simple things like breathing so that we're in touch with our bodies, or slowing down for a minute before we eat and asking our bodies, what does it need right now? Or just asking ourselves more often, how do I feel right now? Do I feel the way I want to feel? And what can I do to shift that?
That's a great couple of starting points. And one of the things about any of these things, and this has been a theme throughout this whole summit, is we see that if you do any one of these things, the sort of impact on the other things improves as well. So if you reduce your stress, you improve your digestion and you improve your gut flora and you improve your ability to detoxify. One positive move in any of these directions sort of it gets you into a virtuous cycle. Whereas if you just sort of it's either a vicious or a virtuous cycle, and you're just sort of dealing with that every day. But any one of these steps can help to sort of catalyze the other steps.
I like that as a mantra, one positive move. But that's good. You just said that, one positive move, and it's true. And often just shifting a pattern in one area also allows us to shift patterns in other areas. So, for example, a lot of times we we often believe that we can't do something. We can't go back to school. We can't be in the relationship that makes us happy. We can't exercise. And so let's say a woman goes on a diet to lose weight, and then she self-sabotages because of this belief that she can't. And that affects everything else. So confidence in one area affects your ability to do things. So I love that. One positive move. I'm going to say that to my patients and people I consult with from now on. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Okay, great. So we're eating better, we're cultivating that sort of, that mindfulness. So these are definitely things that people can start to take advantage of in their own life. Now, you've obviously seen over time that there's been a new understanding of these modalities that at one point had no value and suddenly have value. You know, one of the things I see all the time is something like the concept of leaky gut, right? 15 years ago, when you probably were practicing as an herbalist, if you said leaky gut to a doctor, they would laugh you out of the room, and they probably still would to this day, the majority of them. But now there's a ton of science and shows that it's real. And it seems like with a lot of these alternative modalities as well, there's starting to become an understanding that there is value. So let's just say women are taking care of the things that are there to take care of, and now they're seeking to meet with a health provider who is providing some of these alternative modalities. How do you see those fitting into the evolution of medicine?
Well, medicine is very interesting, and as a profession, it's funny. It tends to dismiss things until they're proven by science. And then once they're proven by science, it's like, oh, this has been part of medicine all along. We created this. So I kind of see that happening a lot. But the positive side of that is so many more patients, so many more individuals can go to the physician and not get laughed out of the room. Although I still have a lot of patients who tell me their doctor thinks that they're irritable bowel syndrome or their chronic fatigue or their fibromyalgia symptoms are just all in their head. In fact, the number of antidepressants that women and anti-anxiety medications that women are being prescribed for things that are quote unquote all in their head is really pretty astronomical. But there's definitely more recognition that even within the medical community that, hey, we thought chronic fatigue was ridiculous 10 years ago. And actually, even though some doctors may laugh about it, it is a recognized condition now. So it's not something crazy. But things like adrenal fatigue now or gluten intolerance now are what things like chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia were, 15 years ago. But there's definitely a shift in the sense that doctors are taught, at least, to not dismiss alternative medicines when their patients say that they're using them, mostly because so many patients don't tell their doctors or end up, not telling their doctors, and then they're taking something like a supplement or an herbal medicine, and the doctor prescribes a medication, and there's the concern for supplement or herb drug interactions. So doctors are encouraged in medical training now to at least be open-minded. And even when a patient asks about an alternative or, quote unquote, an alternative therapy, rather than to say, oh, I don't recommend that, to actually say, well, I don't really know much about that, and let me find out and get back to you. So to at least be receptive and help provide patients with meaningful and accurate information. There are also a lot of things that even 10 years ago would have been considered so fringe or lefty alternative medicine that are now much more commonly accepted. So, for example, there are quite a number of supplements. Fish oil is a common one that everybody's probably heard of who's listening, or essential fatty acids that doctors recommend for things like high blood pressure or eczema that years ago, even a few years ago, would have been considered snake oil or alternative or unacceptable, or things like herbal medicines like echinacea, which is considered safe and may help with some cold symptoms, or an herb called horse chestnut, which is the leading herb used in Europe for varicose veins, that is now considered an acceptable medical treatment for women or anyone really with varicose veins or something called venous insufficiency, where the blood pools in the legs and causes a lot of aching and discomfort. A lot of physical manipulation therapies. So there are more osteopathic doctors practicing in conventional medical offices. So DOs practicing with MDs who do osteopathic manipulation, more doctors who are willing to recommend massage therapy or acupuncture or chiropractic for various concerns. And a big piece is insurance companies being willing to reimburse some of these therapies makes a difference as well. Yeah, one more is just mind-body techniques. More medical doctors learn about at least stress reduction and maybe don't know how to guide their patients through it, but might recommend some form of stress reduction.
So as an herbalist, are there certain herbals that you recommend women to have on hand to use in certain sort of acute situations, or otherwise, obviously, if they have a chronic complaint, it would be good to get an individualized approach, because herbology is, not really the same as pharmaceutical medicine, in that you're not always just trying to do sort of one herb for one symptom, really looking to work with underlying causes. But are there certain herbals that you recommend for women to have on hand for use in certain situations?
There are some great herbs to have on hand at home, just in general. For example, a medicine chest, and not specifically for women's health concerns, but for general health concerns that might come up in the household that a woman or anybody might experience. So, for example, aloe, an aloe plant or some aloe gel for burns. A couple of herbs that are great for women specifically to have on hand, although I don't recommend everyone have these on hand, is something called black cohosh. And a lot of people have heard of it for menopause, and it may be a little bit effective for menopause, but what it's really effective for is muscle aches and pains, menstrual cramps, and headaches. So keeping a bottle of the liquid extract of that on hand, or another herb that works very similarly called cramp bark, can be helpful for unexpected headaches or menstrual cramps or flu or colds where there's aching. Similarly, lavender oil is a wonderful essential oil to keep on hand at home. A couple of drops can be put on the temples for headaches, or it's a wonderful, lovely scented, or most people have smelled lavender, to add 5 to 7 drops to a hot bath with a couple of cups of Epsom salts and soak in that for just melting away stress at the end of the day, or for helping if you have sleep trouble. So there are a number of sort of home remedies like that that are safe and very accessible. One thing that women can do, especially if they have a lot of breast tenderness around their period or cystic breast throughout the month, PMS, or any symptoms of estrogen excess that I talked about earlier in our talk, is actually just to take 2 tablespoons of ground up flaxseed every day. It's very safe. It's also great for constipation. A lot of women have chronic constipation, and that affects our detoxification and our hormones and our gut flora. So just taking a couple of ground tablespoons of flax in your salad or in some cooked cereal or in a smoothie can be really helpful, and that's safe for everyone to take. But like you said, James, herbal medicine isn't really one size fits all. There are some terrific books out there on the market for women who want to learn more about using herbs for more general things like PMS, but working with a functional medicine doctor, an integrative doctor, a naturopath, or an herbalist who's skilled in women's health can really help women to get more individualized, targeted support for their chronic health conditions.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's extremely valuable. So, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about sort of creating sustainable change, because that's really what I'm looking to ignite from this summit, is for people to, yes, take that responsibility. But I know one of the big things that Dr. Hyman is big on is peer support. And, it just seems like the woman is in such a responsible role in the family, because they're actually sort of driving the healthcare purchasing or the healthcare delivery of the children and of the parents. I certainly wouldn't be here doing this if I had grown up, with a traditional medical family. My interest in this was since the beginning. I was the weird kid at school who did homeopathy. I had a chiropractic adjustment after about 15 minutes old. So I've been in this world for a long time, and it's my mother, to a greater degree, who sort of opened me up to these kind of thoughts. So, just in that context, what role do you think, and how can women best sort of be a part of this wellness revolution? Because it seems like they have more responsibility just because they're responsible for the other people in the family, the children certainly. But I always hear from doctors that typically, like, the mother will come in or the wife will come in, they'll get help, and then eventually they'll encourage the husband to come in when he has problems. So it seems like they're the linchpin in this whole process.
Absolutely. In fact, most men who show up at the doctor's office show up there because their girlfriend or their wife or their mother nudged them enough to get there. And I've even had a couple of patients women patients, who were completely healthy and did not need my services at the functional medicine clinic at all, but who have booked appointments for themselves just to convince their husband or partner or boyfriend to actually book an appointment too. So that's how some men have surreptitiously ended up in my practice. Hopefully no men listening to this will question their wives if they've got an appointment with me. But women have historically played a role in being activists for political, social, and environmental change, and particularly mothers and women who are concerned about the next generation. I always say, you don't want to get between a mama bear and her cubs. And that's really what's happening right now. Big food and big pharma and just all these food and environmental crises are, in a way, getting in between moms and their children, in the sense that this is the first generation in modern history that is actually predicted to have a shorter expected lifespan than their parents. And that's really terrifying. So mamas increasingly are not taking that quietly. And I mean, the great news is that things are changing. Like I said, organic was kind of a word, 15 years ago. And now, because of these economic pressures that women are making with their purchases, organic is going Walmart, if you will. And I think it's just brilliant. Women supporting women is also an incredibly powerful tool. And in fact, I'm in the process of really transforming my own website into an online community or tribe for women and women who are moms to connect and share. Women are democratizing healthcare by, sharing information on the internet. There are just tons of mommy bloggers, women bloggers. And it's not really a new phenomenon. Like in the 1960s and 70s, we really saw it emerging in the Boston Women's Health Book Collective that created Our Bodies, Ourselves. But this has gone on really since probably the beginning of time, women being community healers or women gathering around cooking fires and talking and taking care of each other's kids and sharing information. Women's shared experiences are powerful tools. They're powerful opportunities for mutual understanding, validation, but especially for normalizing what for women in our modern society might seem like really isolating experiences. So, for example, prenatal groups and postpartum visits allow women to have the opportunity to discuss things that they might not if they're isolated in kind of nuclear family situations and don't have moms and grandmas who have that wisdom to share, because our moms and grandmas sometimes lost that information. And it can make women realize that they're not alone and other women are going through it, or maybe that even what they're going through is normal. And we've also seen that women with breast cancer who attend support groups may have better survival outcomes. And even for things like weight loss, people who try to lose weight in communities are more likely to be successful than in isolation.
Yeah, we're getting into this. This is actually a theme all the way through the summit. We've got doctors talking about, how they're doing group visits. We've got patients, we've got people talking about the 80% of healthcare that's delivered not by medical professionals. You know, you get sick and your sister-in-law brings you over some chicken soup. You know, this is part of the medical system. It's just not monetized and it's just not seen as part of it. But I really feel like part of the evolution of medicine is identifying these things that are sort of extraneous to medicine, how it has been, but really form a big part of keeping us all well. And it certainly seems like there's a lot for that. My mother-in-law actually last year lost 110 pounds, and the only difference that she had is that she changed a little bit with her diet, but the actual thing that she had to do was have an accountability, someone that she had to call every day to tell them what she'd eaten. And just having someone that she had to call and sort of be honest with what she had done and whether she'd fallen off the wagon or otherwise, this was just the one change that needed to happen. So I just see that what you're talking about, community and peer support, is going to be so crucial. And, you know, with the internet, not only can we distribute all of this information far and wide, which you mentioned, but also, you know, I think there's potential for support through these kind of means as well that has never been allowed before. But there is something special about getting with people in person. So do you see these kind of communities being the blueprint for this evolution of medicine? And what's been your experience as sort of being on the front line as a physician in an innovative clinic?
So I think that the internet has it runs the risk of isolating people or electronic media, in the sense that, you know, so often we see people on public transportation or out to dinner at a restaurant with someone, and, you know, everybody's looking at their cell phone instead of each other. So we have to be careful with technology and not let it separate us or focus down rather than kind of take the big literal view of what's going on around us. On the other hand, it can be challenging for busy moms, busy professionals, or women who are doing both to make time to go to a community support group or get together with girlfriends and talk about what's going on. So the internet has, I think, created networks of women all over the world who can find each other with common concerns and common interests. So I think the role of the internet in health is still emerging, but there are some really valuable pieces to it, much like the work that you guys are doing with Revive. I mean, it's powerful. So that is definitely one direction. Group visits can be incredibly powerful. And one of the things about group visits that I love is that there's almost no work for the doctor or the facilitator to do. When you get a group of people together who have a common shared interest, once you kick it off, people start bringing up questions that you might not even have realized that somebody with diabetes or endometriosis or a history of infertility or miscarriages or whatever it is experiences. And so the shared experiences that start to go around in those groups are so powerful for the participants, but they're amazing learning tools for the physician, who can then work with their next patient who comes in for a private visit, and you know what to ask, you know what the concerns might be. So that's really powerful. And, you know, I think most doctors and most patients really want the same thing. People want to be heard, connected with. They want to feel like they're welcomed and cared for and that they belong. I mean, there's so much burnout amongst physicians because they feel like they're just having to fill out paperwork and do these checklists and meet requirements for accountability. And that's not what a lot of doctors went into healthcare for. I mean, we want to connect with our patients and make a difference. And patients want to come in and feel like, wow, somebody listened and somebody cared. And so I think that, look, for me, to see healthcare refocus itself on exactly that, health and care, rather than calling itself a medical system. Because really, frankly, James, I mean, I'm saying this as a doctor, the way it's running now is much more as a medical industry, and patients feel that, and nobody loves that. And so many people go outside of the medical system and go to unlicensed or non-medical healthcare providers, not so much even because they want an herb or because they want a massage, but they want to be heard. And these more alternative providers, just like I did when I was a midwife and an herbalist, I mean, we tend to provide our patients with an hour visit at the first consult.
Yeah.
We actually do that at the functional medicine clinic, at the functional medicine center that I work in. I mean, we really are very time intensive. My first appointment with every single patient is 80 minutes. Plus they get an appointment with their nutritionist. I think another shift that we do at our center, and that alternative or integrative or functional practitioners do, whether doctors or not, is there's much more of a focus on what creates health. How can we help you create health in your life? And when I ask my patients, a lot of them have never even thought about what it means to be healthy. So sometimes we start to just create a definition of what healthy means, and then what things in their life are interfering with them getting healthy, or what things in their life, what things they need to add to their life to get healthy. Whereas most medical encounters are actually just about fixing something broken. Like, you try to find the one thing that's broken and give a surgery or give a prescription to fix it. And so I think shifting from a disease-based fix it model to how can we promote health will heal a lot, because that requires us to understand each other's lives and figure out what's missing and what's not working.
Exactly. Well, the intention with this event is really to be the world's biggest medical conference, but I don't think we can solve the problems in medicine without inviting the patients. And that's why we have a patient track. And I think today you've really outlined some great starting points for every woman and anyone else listening to, really be healthy and take responsibility for what's theirs, what to look for in a provider, some of the green shoots in this evolution of medicine. I guess, before, in our last thought here, Doctor, you've been so eloquent with all of these points. Is there something more about the evolution of medicine that you feel like you'd like to share, as far as how you see medicine either evolving or how medicine needs to evolve looking forward from here?
I think we share a quote that we both love, James. I think that there's a quote that I've seen maybe before that I also love, and it's by Buckminster Fuller. And he says, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." And I feel like that's what a lot of us are trying to do. I like to call what I do the new medicine, because that's really what it is. It's a new way of thinking and being and connecting and sharing with patients. And there's a whole new set of tools we're using too, which is so exciting and positive. Functional medicine doctors, integrative doctors, whatever you want to call it. And there are some differences, but we're relying on foods and self-help tools, simple herbs and lifestyle changes. And I just think it's so exciting. And I would love to encourage women to believe in their bodies again, to believe in the healing power of their bodies, and to trust their instincts. If you go to a healthcare provider and you're just not feeling it, if your instinct tells you, hey, maybe I don't need that medication, or maybe I don't need that surgery, start to trust yourself. It doesn't mean 100% that you don't and that you wouldn't benefit from it, but I think listening to ourselves, listening to our intuition, and trusting how we're feeling in our bodies is part of that mindfulness and that next step toward the evolution of medicine.
That's so beautifully put, and thank you, for sharing that. Well, we've had some really amazing and profound moments throughout this summit, and I really thank you for your time, Dr. Aviva Romm. I appreciate what you're doing in really building that new paradigm that is making the old paradigm obsolete, the work that you're doing with your writing and the work in your clinic. If you'd like to find out more about Dr. Aviva Romm, you can go to her website, and we look forward to, many more opportunities to continue to build this new paradigm. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you for all you're doing, James. It's amazing.
I appreciate it. This has been the Evolution of Medicine Summit. This is James Maskell. Hold on for some great new content today and for the rest of the week. Dr. Aviva Rom, it's been a pleasure, and we'll see you next time.